Here are 10 more bandsaw tips I've cooked up over the past couple years. Some old favorites, some you've probably never seen. Like my last full-size tip video, I've indexed each of the tips so you can skip ahead if you've already seen it. You'll also find helpful links in the description to go along with the video. Let's band together.
There is a flame that burns inside myself.
If you're struggling to get a good resaw cut, a single point fence is something you need to consider. Think of these easy to use points as a steering wheel for your stock. The blade lines up at the teeth or to the center, and it allows you to steer your stock on either a pre-drawn line or by using tip number 129, where we use a cheaper table saw blade to hog out a lot of the cut. The nice things about these fences is how easy they are to make. Chisel out a groove in a piece of plywood and attach a second piece of stock with a bevel lip and a few screws. All you need now are a couple clamps to hold the fence down. Steering the lumber is easy as I have the exact thickness set with the fence. It's just a matter of balancing and aligning the back edge to keep things in check. To make it without needing F-clamps and making it a little more advanced, I created a simple miter T-bar to lock it in my miter slot. 2 grooves were cut along the body that allows it to slide the distance you're looking for away from the blade. I added braces and a 4-inch conduit tube to the point to help reduce friction. For more bandsaw tips as well as a video to the advanced build, I have links in the description below. Bandsaw-drift is a phenomenon that has become a mysterious and falsely created condition of a blade having a unique fingerprint, which causes it to drift. There have been so many inaccurately written assumptions of why it happens, but the truth is, bandsaw drift is very simple to understand. Every tooth on the bandsaw blade is set off-center to the blade, set either to the right or to the left side. When one side is duller than the other, the blade will tend to cut in the direction of the teeth that are sharp, which causes the drift to happen. In time, smaller width blades can wear prematurely on the left side due to the compression against the wheel, which leads to the drift moving towards the right side of the bandsaw. This isn't nearly as important for smaller blades as making straight cuts isn't a priority, but with larger blades, resawing is a struggle when one side becomes duller than the other. But there are a few methods we can use to keep our blades sharper longer. This involves modifying the fence, using a single point, and by releasing the tension on the blades. If resawing lumber interests you, I have a link to a longer video in the description below. While any split log can be chucked up on the lathe, the best practice is to clean the log up before starting by removing the bark and, if you can, the corners. The bandsaw is a perfect way to do this as there's a lot of freedom with movement. Bandsaws are only safe when we're placing a flat surface against a tabletop. Any curved surface, as seen in number 15, can be grabbed and pulled out of your hands, damaging your blade. To get around this, we need to create 2 points of contact, which will help to prevent this destructive force. A few years ago, I created a bandsaw jig that has a cutout in the center of the jig, allowing the blade to be inserted into the bed. Once the blade is inserted, we'll line up what we'll want to cut off and lock the jig into the miter slot. With a setup like this, I can cut corners off as well as shape stock before I move it to the lathe. Sharpening lathe tools isn't my most favorite thing to do in the shop, and this jig helps by eliminating rough starts. My older bandsaw jig used a very shallow end for the cut, but I've updated it to be equal lengths away from the blade. I've also written plans and made a step-by-step video showing how to build this. All the plans to make this are free. You can get links to them in the description below. A few intricate accents can go a long way in a finished project. If you're looking for an easy way to really add a lot of flair, there's a simple technique that can be done with the bandsaw. I have a piece of maple that on its own is simple and basic. We'll bring it to the bandsaw and add a few wide sweeping curves, being careful not to stop during the cut. I've cut some thin strips of wood that are 1/16 of an inch thick and longer than my bandsaw cut stock. Now, you'll need to take both halves, your thin strips, and add glue. Once we've lathered everything down, we'll sandwich them together and add clamps. Give it time to dry, and that's it. There are a few things to remember when doing this though. First of all, clamping your stock together can be problematic if you're creating large pieces with this. Using a number of F-clamps will clamp your stock together, but be sure to use cawls or even a woodworking vise to ensure even pressure along the width to prevent uneven gluing. Also make sure to cut along the grain and not across the grain so you're not gluing end grain together. Finally, add clamps in the middle first, moving out to both ends, and use clamps to keep all your stock pieces on the same plane. If you'd like to see how I made this cup, I have a link in the description under pencil cup. Usually with a bandsaw, you're looking to make it cut from start to finish, but other times I use it for joints or for nibbling things out. Having a positive stop in these circumstances is ideal, so I made one with a magnetic switch. To make one, I started off with a thick block of wood. I used a hole saw to bore through half of it, and used my bandsaw to cut the rest of the way, cutting the jig to shape to finish it off. Then I made a studded knob that would work to raise and lower the inside magnet. With the half of a block of wood that I didn't bore through, I added a T-nut and glued the assembly together. I also wanted to be able to position it between my wide blade, so I added a couple large teeth. I found it worked pretty good, but because the wood bottom had very little friction, I added tracker runner so that it gripped the tabletop. Overall, it works pretty good. I found that I could even use it as a stop for bandsaw sled attachments that use a miter bar. This will work with a future secret project, but you can see the full build of this on my second channel. For a quick link to it, the dovetail joint is one of the most well-known interlocking joints that uses a group of pins and tails to fasten two edges together, but they can be really difficult to create by hand as each cut needs to be precise. I came up with a method using the bandsaw that relies on two separate jigs that attach to a single jig that slides in the miter slot, as well as my own tail marking jig. After marking the tails on the stock, the first jig cuts out the lines on the tail board. These tails are then transferred to the pin board by using a knife, and a square transfers the lines on the face of the stock. The second bandsaw jig is angled to the exact angle that we cut our tails to, and it's just a matter of running the blade along the marks we created with our knife earlier. Because there are two angles on each of the tails, we need to flip our pin jig and stock to cut the inverse angle. Like the tail, we need to hog the middle out and we're done. What I like about this is the fact that I can get straight cuts with the bandsaw that are very difficult to achieve with a handsaw. I have free step-by-step plans and a how-to video to make this simplified method. If you're interested, check out the link in the description. One of the best ways to harvest free lumber is by slicing log sections on the bandsaw, but with the downward force of the blade, it's only safe to cut a log if it has a stable flat edge. The problem is logs rarely have a flat surface. A jointer could help, but if the log is large or twisted, a jointer just won't cut it. The easiest way I've found is to cradle the log with a split fence that rides with the stock to keep it balanced to the tabletop. The fence uses hinges and is screwed into the log, but it's important to lay the log on its most stable face before adding the screws. You really don't want it to rock as the blade bears down into the wood. Since logs are rarely straight, the split fence allows me to account for twists and uneven surfaces. The base below the log doesn't need to be attached to the fence, but it should be large enough to support both the fence and the log. Now I add a chalk line so that I can keep things lined up as I cut. The goal is to make a single slice along the edge of the log, creating a flat surface that runs true against the bandsaw table, preventing any dangerous twists while cutting. At this point, free lumber is just a few cuts away. For close to 2 decades, I've fought my bandsaw when it comes to resawing lumber. It's taken me almost that long to figure out the real issue isn't the bandsaw or my setup. The actual problem, which continues to be a problem, is outdated blade technology. Early blacksmiths discovered that if saw teeth were offset or set, alternatively left and right, it created a slightly wider curve than the blade itself, which helped prevent binding. The problem is that even if a single tooth on one side or the other becomes damaged or dull, the blade will drift towards the side of least resistance. If you're freehand cutting without a fence, this isn't much of an issue, but resawing is where the mind-numbing frustration kicks in. Nowadays, we have carbide-tooth blades that don't rely on setting. These blades don't drift. This means I can make a series of cuts on a piece of lumber and get near-perfect results with minimal cleanup required later. The downside is that they create a wider curve, but that doesn't matter as I used to rely heavily on my planer to clean things up. The best part of carbide blades is that they last much longer than regular blades, making them worth the extra cost. To watch my bandsaw drift video explaining this better, we can think of a bandsaw blade just like sandpaper. The larger the teeth, the rougher the results. Big teeth remove material fast, but just like using coarse sandpaper, you'll need to clean things up later. For a smooth cut with minimal sanding, fine-tooth blades and precise cutting are the way to go. But there's another problem: heat. Too much friction leads to burning in wood and melting in plastic. A quick, simple trick to reduce friction and heat is to lubricate the blade, keeping it cooler and preventing burns or melting as you cut. There are a number of ways to lubricate a bandsaw blade. Long-term Bow Shield T9 added to the blade, left to set and then wipe clean is the best. Another option is paste wax, which needs time to cure before buffing off. But there's a faster way: paraffin wax. A simple candlestick made of paraffin will fix things in seconds. If you plan on using a candlestick, flatten the bottom so that it doesn't spin in your hands. Then bring it around to the back of the blade and press lightly. The heat will melt just enough wax to coat the blade naturally. It doesn't last as long as the others, so keep it nearby and use it every 15 to 20 minutes. Cutting shapes is best done with something like a bandsaw, but because of bandsaw limitations, there will be times when what you need to cut is restricted by your bandsaw. The best option we have for cutting curves at this point is a jigsaw. Unfortunately, these saws are not perfect as the blade is not supported under the project. It takes a little extra work, but there is a method that can give us cuts that are not only as parallel as bandsaw cuts, but with an even better finish at the end. We'll instead turn to a trim router. Chuck up a thin straight cut bit and allow it to protrude no more than 1/4 of an inch below the base. Take your time cutting up to the line just as you would with a bandsaw. When you're done, grab the jigsaw and cut directly down the center of the cut you made. Alternatively, if you only need one edge, you can angle the bottom of the blade away from the main part. Finally, come back with a router and a flush cut bit to clean up the rest of the cut. This gives you a smooth, precise edge that's even better than what a bandsaw could give you. Thank you, friend, for joining me. If you found a tip you can use, please let me know in the comments. It helps more than you know. As always, I want to thank the patrons that help keep these videos rolling. If you'd like to become a part of the team or throw a tip in the jar, check the link in the description. And remember to keep making things.
burns inside myself.